thanks for joining on this quite sunny Tuesday afternoon to explore what we think is a really important and interesting conversation to bring together the sort of civic and climate agendas within our institutions and think about the connections and crossovers between those. Just by way of introduction, I'm really pleased to be co-chairing this event today with Iain from the Alliance for Sustainability Leadership in Education, and we are really pleased to be jointly delivering this event. I'm here wearing sort of two hats. I'm the Head of Policy and Strategy for Sheffield Hallam University, and Sheffield Hallam University is very proudly the host of the Civic University Network. And so it's been fantastic to kind of work on we very much are thinking about the sort of civic agenda, and connecting that to climate is clearly something that we see as a real opportunity, and working with the Alliance to sort of explore that and discuss with you guys what sorts of things, what different approaches institutions are using in that space is really critical. And I also, wearing my Hallam hat, I co-chair our climate action steering group. So there's lots that I'm hoping to pick up from here today that I can bring back into the Civic University Network, but also to Sheffield Hallam in terms of the practical ways in which climate and civic come together. So that's just a really quick introduction. There are, of course, we're used to this by now, some housekeeping things to say. Claire's already highlighted the fact that we are recording this event, and it will be made available afterwards. You'll be able to download it and watch it again and again with some popcorn if you wish. Please do use the chat function. There will be, as Iain said, we're really keen on this being an interactive dialogue today, so please do use the chat function with any thoughts or reflections or questions that you might have, either for individual speakers or for other colleagues or across the panelists. So please do that. There will be some polling and some other activities, and this is the first time that our two institutions have worked together on this sort of event, so we're really looking forward to this, and we see this hopefully as the sort of start of a beautiful journey, a beautiful relationship where we might continue to do things together, because it is such a critical agenda. And just even reflecting from Sheffield Hallam's point of view, I've just come from a meeting of civic institutions talking about what sort of practical interventions we might be able to do in the climate space, and how we might work more effectively together on practical things. And it was sort of quite striking to us that there wasn't such a forum previously where key sort of institutions in the regions, the universities and the hospitals, etc., got together wearing our kind of civic and climate hat. So it's all very sort of fresh in my mind. I'm going to introduce you to the speakers in a moment, and ask each of the speakers to speak for 6 or 7 minutes in terms of their own institutional perspectives and priorities in terms of connecting the climate and the civic agendas. But first I'm going to hand over to my lovely co-host, to Iain, who is also going to just talk us through some polling and some of the aspirations for the event. But welcome, and we're really looking forward to today's discussion. Over to you, Iain.
Thanks, Natalie. And no popcorn has been provided. I'm a little disheartened, but no, it's great to be here. It's really important that we do this together, that we ensure that our institutions recognise the interdependence, the connectivity, the opportunity of not just approaching this from a civic agenda or the sustainability agenda, but in a collaborative way. So this is a really important symbolic position to take. Because we are so ambitious for this agenda. Our students expect it, our research is clearly pointing towards its need, and society expects it. So it's a really opportunistic, enterprising space, this. So hello, I'm Iain Patton, CEO of the EAUC, the Alliance for Sustainability Leadership in Education. So we are the sector lead body, call us what you want, for this wider agenda. We've got 7,000 members, we've got 90% of the sector in our membership, UK and Ireland, but we know this. We know that we cannot do this on our own. We cannot just leave, and I see some amazing, really experienced sustainability leaders on this call. We cannot just leave them to do this. This is a team sport, and climate is absolutely a team sport. So that's why this approach. So Natalie's just mentioned some polling. So we've got about 7 questions, and it's just an opportunity to get us engaging. So Claire, if you could just sort of flash up the Slido QR code and just give people a minute to zap that or log in, whatever you want. And if we could get everyone, or as many as you possible, doing this. While you do that, I'll just give you the heads up and there's a link there, thanks Juana, heads up to what the first question is, just an easy one, and you can be as honest as you should be, but it's describe in one word, and you can have more than one go on this, your institution's current climate action ambition. Free text, just one word. So describe in one word your institution's current climate action ambition. Just trying to get a sense of the room and where we think we're at. It's really interesting as you starting to do that, you know, where the sector is at. Some have declared a climate emergency, some have gone, well, that's not what we do here, some have created quite ambitious net zero targets, some have gone, we can't do that until we're actually clear how we do that. Others will say by doing it, it drives ambition. So what is your institution's ambition? And it's great that we've got further education and higher education in this meeting. So got some good words coming in here. Please keep them coming. Collaborative, happening, influencing, ambitious. Oh, that's these are positive words. Maybe we just got the optimists here today. Oh, confused. Yeah, mediocre, collaborative. Yeah, some extras coming in. Am I just getting 4, Claire? Is that how it works, or do we get them all sort of lumped in together? Keep them coming. Keep them coming. You know, is it an agenda which is led by the top? Is an agenda that's being led by students? Nothing wrong with either of those. It's needing both. Oh, it's a shame we're not getting them all coming into one page. Claire, I don't know if you're able to tweak that so we can sort of see it all in one space like a word cloud. But if you can't, we'll make sure all of this is available. Evolving, challenging. Is that something I can control? No, I can't now. Claire, are you able to fiddle, or just tell me if you're not?
Yeah, no, they're just coming in from the top, so I can roll down, but I can't make them smaller.
Okay, no, if you do a bit of scrolling, that's really helpful. Okay, good. So that's got us tuned in. So there's a queer bit of positivity here. That's good. That's good. And then the next question here would be number 2. How connected and integrated would you say your institution's civic and sustainability agendas are? How connected and integrated would you say your institution's civic and sustainability agendas are? And I've only got one more after this, and then a few more at the very end when we're doing our questions. So not integrated at all. That's strong. So that's nice that we can see all of these in one viewing. So that's great. So let's try and get as many of us contributing as we can. If you've got a problem with the technology, just put it into the chat, and Oana or Claire will try to help. Any other questions or points, do please use the chat as well. We're going to be having quite a big Q&A session at the end, but obviously there will be some questions after each speaker as well. Okay, so let's keep those coming in. So starting to connect, so that's good. That's good. I mean, my first question was, if you're in the civic side, do you know who's on the sustainability or climate side? And if you're on the sustainability climate side, do you know who's on the civic side? That's a good starting point, but I thought I'd be more optimistic than that. Okay, so keep those. So 17 out of 30 have responded. So we'll give that another moment. Just a little bit of, let's just make sure we're all clear about this. So in 2019, the UK government legally committed the country to achieving net zero by 2050. So that's a legal requirement. It was the first in the world and quite leading. But then the Climate Commission, which comprised students, Guild HE, Association of Colleges, UK, facilitated by EAUC, said we need to do better. You know, students expect better. It's our research that's showing, helping the world understand climate change. So we need to be leading here. So we set a more ambitious target of 2030 as the deadline for scopes 1 and 2 emissions, and making major progress on scope 3, and certainly to have scope 3 emissions, all those emissions wrapped up in our travel, our commuting, our procurement, you know, net zero by 2050. So that's where we're coming from. And so actually the Climate Commission has been a really powerful tool to connect leaders of colleges and universities with students, and to really have a direct conversation, because this is both a top-down and a bottom-up activity. So that's been really good. And one of the key tools that you must be aware of, and maybe Claire, if you could put a link into this, into the chat, it would be the Climate Commission's HE Climate Toolkit. It's a really powerful resource. It has a section on civic and community engagement. So universities, you can't do this on your own. You're not a typical stakeholder in a city or a town or a place. You actually have unique opportunities to actually really facilitate collaboration, to train and empower, to raise understanding, to lead to bring your research towards your community partners, engagement and understanding and embracing of this agenda. So universities have a critical role to play in the civic space. So it's great to see that included in the guide. And then the last poll question before I finish, Claire, if you just go on to the last one. And maybe the speakers can just be mindful of this. Name a key barrier to your institution achieving stronger civic climate progress. Name a key barrier. It can be a word, it could be a sentence. Keep them short if possible, to your institution achieving stronger civic climate progress. So let's see what comes in on that front. Just a quickie while you're thinking. If you haven't heard of it, and probably you have, Race to Zero. It's a global commitment for all sorts of organizations, but EAUC and Second Nature in the States lead the university and college version. We've got 1,100 universities and colleges signed up to it. So it's committing you to set a date when you will become net zero emissions. So you pledge to do that, you plan what you're going to do, you make the savings, and then you publish. It's all about that accountability. So make sure you've clocked Race to Zero universities and colleges. Okay, so silo working, capacity, understanding how, yeah, you come to the right place. Collaboration, financial commitments, obsession with economic growth, particularly after the pandemic. Is this a luxury we can't afford, or is this actually going to be the solution to your trouble? My money's on the latter. Funding, lack of coordination locally, continuity, absolutely, particularly with students coming and going, but they're a critical driver. Need more time, resource. Okay, so we've got a really good lack of leadership, right? Well, there's something we definitely need to support you addressing. Okay, I think I'll finish it there. I'll pop more projects and resources as we go into the chat. So, for example, we're actually creating the country's university and college emissions framework, so that we're all eventually starting to scope and count and report our emissions across our institutions consistently. It's not rocket science, but we haven't been doing it. We haven't been able to do it. So the EAUC is working now with the Queen's Jubilee Challenge Fund and many institutions to create a consistent framework for us all to report. So that's going to be really, really empowering. And I'll talk about science-based targets as well, which is absolutely the new agenda on the horizon. We're producing the research that's helping the world understand the changing climate. It's important that we are seen to respond appropriately. Great, so that's me. I'll hand back to Natalie.
Brilliant. Thanks, Iain, and thanks everyone for participating in the polling. It is really useful to sort of see the kind of words that come up and the responses that people have. And also I was quite encouraged by how high the number of people that are connecting the climate and civic agendas already in their institutions. I think that's really encouraging. And certainly as the Civic University Network, we're very keen to support universities as much as possible we can to sort of help to make those connections and to try and break down silos and in institutions and to, Iain gave a bit of a plug to some of the EAUC toolkits, etc. We do use those within our own institutions and have found them to be extremely helpful in trying to get more of a whole of institution approach and making sure that conversations about climate aren't just happening in estates or different parts or in different sort of research pockets, but are genuinely embedded across all activities of the university. So huge thanks for all of you for participating. We are at that point of the workshop where we're going to ask our speakers now to give some starting reflections. And we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers. Unfortunately, we have had colleagues drop out from the University of Newcastle, and you can guess why they have dropped out. It starts with C, and it's something that has dominated our lives for the last 2 years. So unfortunately, COVID has struck our friends in Newcastle, but we have fantastic speakers lined up nonetheless to fill that void. And so what we're going to do is just hear from Iain, from Susan, from Nick, and I'll give you an opportunity. If there's a burning question after each speaker that you absolutely have to pose before we move on, there will be opportunities for 1 or 2 quick questions after each speaker, so we don't forget that question. And then, as Iain said, we're going to spend quite a lot of time at the end of the session having a longer Q&A across them all. So huge thanks to all of our speakers. We've got colleagues from St Andrews, from Hull, from Brighton, so we're really covering the geography of the UK. But I'm going to ask Sir Iain Boyd to kick us off with reflections from St Andrew, and thank you very much, Iain, for joining us.
Let's get into this. University of St Andrews, well, it's a relatively small university, and in that sense it has certain advantages over many other types of universities, because that gives it a certain amount of flexibility. But I think the one thing I would emphasize from the beginning is that we don't see this as simply re-engineering the structures of the universities, which is kind of what happens when you start to take into account just Scope 1 and Scope 2 type emissions. This is a much deeper re-engineering. It's a re-engineering of what it means to be a university. In other words, what it means in terms of its business model. But it's also a re-engineering of the values of those people who are within the university, and that includes obviously our student body and our academics. So this is about designing a sustainable university. So if somebody was to ask me again what the one word was, it's redesign, because actually we are not going to get to where we need to go unless we think in those terms. And I think that's the experience that I can share with you, which is most profound about looking into this, about trying to take an institution towards a kind of net zero goal, is it will not happen if we allow business as usual to be the guide. This is going to be a very hard-earned experience for many people. And many organisations. The other thing I would say is that another role that I have is I chair Scotland's Environment Council with the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. And what I'm trying to do at the university scale, at an institutional scale, I'm also trying to do it at a national government scale as well. So there are things that need to be done at national government scale, and that's that's the right scale at which to do them. Legislation, creating a level playing field, all those sorts of things. But there are also things that individual institutions need to do, and nations are not going to get to net zero. The 2050 target, which is 2050 for the UK, it's 2045 for Scotland. We are not going to get to that target as a nation unless the institutions, like the universities themselves, are incentivized to act in the right sort of ways. So we as an institution are taking that up, and we're being bold about it. And what I want to do is just go through 5 different things that we're doing: governance, objectives, setting objectives, assessing the state of the organisation now, what actions we're beginning to implement for change, and measuring and reporting progress. These are all necessary activities. We have an ambition to be net zero by 2035, and I mean net zero not just in Scope 1 and Scope 2, but that's Scope 3 emissions. We feel that as a leading university, we need to be ahead of the curve on that. We need to be at least 10 years ahead of the rest of the country, because if we can't do it, then nobody's going to be able to do it. And if we can't do it 10 years ahead, then the country is very unlikely to get to that by 2045, which, as I said, is the objective for Scotland. So just to look quickly at governance, if I can move on, we go. So what we have done is created something called Environmental Sustainability Board, which has 10 board members and includes students and staff, academic and professional staff. It has a number of working groups, some of which look at sustainability in the curriculum, but also in research, in the physical infrastructure of the university, in the operations of the university, etc. And also there is a group which specifically looks at the student body and the interactions with the civic structures around us. So those working groups are there to oil the wheels of that process, come up with ideas. This board then takes those, it turns them into early strategic business cases, which it then socializes with the administrative structure of the university, and then hands over to the administrative structure to take, develop and implement. It reports, as the chair of this board, I chair it, it reports to the university courts, it reports the highest level of governance of the university, and it acts like a think tank and a challenge body to the university itself. So governance is the first thing that is really important on this. If you don't get governance right, you're not going to get the ambition right. The university is resetting its strategy now, and one of the 4 pillars of the strategy is going to be sustainability. As an interim to that, the Environmental Sustainability Board did set the strategy not long after its existence, about 18 months ago, and through a consultation process, the university community itself decided that net zero by 2035 is what it wants to go to, even though we do not have a clear track to get there. And I'll come back to that in a minute. It's going to be enormously challenging to do that. And as I said, I think there's I think the University of St Andrews is going to have to look very, very different by 2035 if it's going to be a net zero institution. So what's the state of the organisation now? Well, here's the sort of pie diagram of our Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. And it gives you an idea of the size of the challenge. The right-hand side of this diagram is really all the kind of hard engineering of the university. It's the heating systems, the electricity, it's the construction, those sorts of things. And you'll see the right-hand side is not very big. The left-hand side is the really big bit. And the left-hand side, it's student travel and it's procurement. So when we talk about going to net zero by dealing with Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, we're actually dealing with a very small part of the whole pie. We do need to focus on those Scope 3 emissions, and if we don't do it, then it's never going to happen. So the biggest challenge for us is actually in travel and procurement, not in getting our institutional structure, hard structures down to net zero. So actions for change, well, a lot of the activities that the university has gone through so far over the last 10 years, actually, because this has been building up over quite a long period of time, have been about trying to drive for sustainability. We have a district heating system, and there's a debate going on at the moment about whether we can actually get that rolled out to the local community, not just the university. And that district heating system is biomass run. We've got a solar array that is alongside our biomass plant as well. We've got a new campus that we're designing specifically to be net zero. And any new buildings we're going to put up will obviously be low energy buildings. But we also have a lot of teaching and academic activity, which is being refocused onto developing a net zero agenda, because this is not just about getting the University of St Andrews to net zero, it's about getting the whole of the community, the country and the world to net zero as well. And the more we can focus our research and teaching on that, the better. So we actually have a School of Sustainable Development at the university, and we have an international prize that we sponsor every year called the St Andrews Prize for the Environment as well. Actions for change, well, we've got a carbon management plan, and that really kind of looks at a lot of the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but it's also getting into Scope 3. And the sustainability management plan is also about things other than carbon. If we just focus on carbon, we won't solve this problem. We have to include water, we have to include biodiversity, we have to include where our food comes from and whether that is actually sustainable as well. And that is something that is driven very much by our student community. And the students are very, very active in this. They have come up with, for example, a business case about building what we call St Andrews Forest, green infrastructure fundamentally, and we're already on the track of developing that into something which is tangible. We're buying land and we're beginning to plant trees. So here's a statement of the size of the challenge we have. This is about measuring and reporting progress. These are the routes towards net zero by 2035. The top line here, which is the blue line at the top, is the business as usual if we don't do anything. All the other ones are the different elements of carbon, and the brown line shows the storage of carbon that we need to put in place. We cannot get to our objective unless we store carbon, and that is absolutely clear from all the analyses we've done. And what are we doing about that? Well, I've mentioned the idea of St Andrews Forest, but we also have 25,000 tons of CO2 coming out of our biomass plant every year, which we are working on. We're working on the chemistry of that to scale that up to be able to absorb it and either store it or turn it into liquid biofuels of some sort. So we need to store that carbon, otherwise we are never going to get to our net zero target. And with that, I'll probably finish because I've probably taken up too much of my time. That's where we are at St Andrews. So thanks very much for your attention.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Iain. And I could tell that your dog was sort of competing for your attention during that. And you did very well to hold the line.
I really do apologise for that.
No, not at all. Dogs, kids, pets, everybody's welcome at this forum. So thank you hugely for that really thorough presentation about the approach at St Andrews. And it does sound like you've got quite a lot of systems and structures in place in which to tackle the challenge. We did have one question in the chat during your presentation, which was sort of, and perhaps you did kind of come to this towards the end, but how you get a really true reflection of where you're at now in terms, I guess, of your sort of climate impact and I guess, how you got that sort of evidence base from which to then develop the appropriate strategies and infrastructures to deliver that. So perhaps you could share some thoughts on how you got to that point, Iain.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, we're still on that journey. I mean, we're on a journey here in total, but we're still on the journey to understand what our impacts are. I moved from carbon to sustainability overall. And actually measuring that is in itself a research challenge. I don't think it's easy to measure it. When you start looking at the complexities of supply chains, understanding what those impacts are, especially for imported goods and things like that, is enormously difficult. I think this is one area where we as a university community, and also university community alongside civic communities, could work much more closely together to try to drive the kind of change in basically at the higher level, at government policy level, to require suppliers to supply information about the embedded water, carbon, energy, etc. in products. If we don't have that basic information, it is enormously difficult for us to properly account for our environmental impacts. And that's what we find at an institutional level, is that actually, is it for us to try to gather that information? I mean, we could try it, but the reality is it's a massive, massive job to do. I think it's something that needs to be done at national level in terms of national legislation. But we are starting at an institutional level to do carbon accounting for individual travel and that sort of thing. We're providing people with carbon calculators, and in due course, we'll be incentivizing people to look not just at the cost of what they purchase, like travel, for example, but also the carbon impacts of what they purchase, by giving them not just financial budgets, but actually carbon and sustainability budgets as well. So they'll have to balance off all these different things to try and make an optimal decision about what they want to do with their resources. Sorry about the dogs.
No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, I think there's a related question there in the chat about how, you know, like many institutions, perhaps we've set ambitious emissions reduction targets, and in some cases really with a kind of crossed fingers approach that we might be able to make those targets, and how does it kind of land with, you know, colleagues in terms of that, you know, making the targets but not necessarily having the clarity on how you're going to get there?
So yeah, I mean, that's a challenge. You know, I will say I've come from a background in government. I think you have to set challenges, some of which are very stretching, even if you don't know how to get there. You know, one of the criticisms I have of the Committee on Climate Change approach to this is that I think it's making it's designing the response to the challenge at a national scale in a way that is actually not sufficiently realistic. Okay, sometimes in the statements that come from the Committee on Climate Change, they're saying that there's a big job to be done here, but actually when you look at the analyses, they say, well, if you do this, this and this, it can all be done. Actually, I'm not sure that's correct. I think that we need a very big change in our values about what we spend our time doing and how we spend our money, because if we don't change those values, we are going to end up as a nation way overshooting our targets, and we will do that at institutional level as well. So yes, that's a hard message for colleagues, but I find that we've done surveys of our colleagues, you know, well over 90% of colleagues in the university are with us in their hearts on this. They're not with us in their minds yet. And I think the challenge they put to us is convince us that there's a pathway through this. And by the way, we also have some ideas here. So they're putting ideas in the pot as well. So this is about activating the community to try to solve this problem as a community, and not for it to be done by a bunch of people sitting in a room thinking up ideas and then imposing it on them. We need to do it as a community, and what we're trying to do, I wouldn't say we're wonderfully successful at it yet at St Andrews, but we're trying to make this a community effort. And unless we do that both at institutional level and at national level, we'll never win hearts and minds. If you don't win hearts and minds, you're never going to get there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Iain. I think that's been a really helpful sort of starting set of reflections from you, and drawing on your vast experience within higher education and in government has been really important. And I think just making those connections to the sort of civic in terms of the bottom-up initiatives and the sort of whole institutional approach that is needed to make this happen has been really, really helpful. I'm going to suggest we move on to our next speaker now, and as I said, there'll be lots of Q&A at the end, but I'm really delighted to welcome Professor Susan Lee, who's the Vice Chancellor of the University of Hull, to come and share your experience and institutional approach to connecting civic and climate. So over to you, Susan. I think you've also got slides, but I'm not sure if you have any dogs in the background.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for the opportunity to spend a few minutes this afternoon talking about the place-based approach that is integral to Hull's contribution to climate action. You know, I'd like to start with the reflection that the IPCC is clear. You know, we are facing a climate emergency that will see devastating and large-scale impacts on our planet. And unless we act swiftly, comprehensively, and strategically, So universities have a central role to play in facilitating a just transition to net zero through their research and knowledge exchange, their education and community engagement, and indeed their own practice. But we know that solving such wicked problems as climate change requires us to work in concert with others to have impact. And this starts in our own place, but reaches further nationally and internationally. So we describe the University of Hull as an internationally engaged civic, which plays a strong anchor institution role, as indeed the only university in the Humber region, but explicitly and intentionally connecting from the local to the global. So, for example, the challenges associated with flooding faced by communities in the Humber echo those of communities in the Mekong Delta and the Amazon. So let me just turn to the Humber, the UK's biggest carbon polluter, responsible for 25% of the country's carbon emissions, also the most flood-prone region in the UK after London. So we would be among the first to experience the impact of rising sea levels. An area of stark inequalities in terms of education, life expectancy, and disease outcomes. Almost half of the areas in the city of Hull are among the most deprived 10% in England. Appreciating, therefore, the interconnection between climate change and social justice is important because the impacts of climate change are differential, often exacerbating the already significant inequalities that exist globally. So in tackling the climate crisis, we should be seeking a transition to a more just and equitable society. This is the rationale behind these two themes being core to the University of Hull's 2030 strategy, together with three pillars of focus: people, place, and partnership. The strategy points the way to attaining our vision as a university of a fairer, brighter, and carbon neutral future. So how do we affect social change in relation to the climate emergency through our civic mission? First of all, we must be connected at the strategic level to have impact on policy and practice. A common understanding of the challenges and a shared vision for change is essential if we are to take the sort of coordinated action that's necessary to achieve our goals. In the Humber, this strong conviction to deliver net zero is shared across educational institutions, local authorities, LEPs, public sector organisations, major industry leaders, and SMEs alike. Indeed, the region is determined to lead the way to net zero. As we say, if you can achieve a just transition to net zero in the Humber, you can achieve it anywhere. And last week, we saw the launch of the Oh Yes Net Zero campaign, in which the university played a key role, attended by COP26 President Alok Sharma, school children and community organisations, as well as business. And it set the challenge for individuals, households, and organisations, large and small, to play their part in making changes. Pan-Humber initiatives such as the Humber Energy Board and the new private sector-led partnership Opportunity Humber, announced recently in the Levelling Up white paper, are further examples of strategic collaborative activity. So transitioning to net zero requires research and innovation, and universities have a key role in this space, both in collaborating with large organisations and supporting small and medium-sized organisations which often do not have the resources needed to change their practice. The Aura Innovation Centre and the Flood Resilience Centre connect Hull academics to regional SMEs, supporting them respectively to build their low carbon capacity and their organisational resilience in relation to flooding. Sharing expert knowledge and supporting businesses to develop their employees' skills is another key role for universities. So, for example, in collaboration with regional employers, Hull has launched its Sustainable Skills Programme. These 6 short CPD courses explore the key challenges and opportunities of climate change and enable participants to learn about their practical solutions. Collaboration with the public sector is equally important. For example, we're working with Hull City Council on a range of projects. Just one of these is the creation of a low carbon house to demonstrate at full scale the effectiveness and affordability of a low carbon heating system developed by the university. Importantly, that can be retrofitted to existing buildings. as energy bills push more homes into fuel poverty, rolling out this kind of technology grows ever more urgent. Universities also have a strong civic role through their public engagement, connecting with their local communities and the vibrant voluntary and community sector. Indeed, universities have a fundamental role in raising awareness, as well as educating and supporting communities and individuals to build resilience and to act. For us, this includes a youth-led citizen science program linked to our work on hedgerows and afforestation. Our Risky Cities project helps communities act to better protect their homes from flooding and coastal erosion. And the Whole We Want community partnership, which works with individuals in our communities to reimagine their futures, includes work on climate change and resilience. Ensuring that our own house is in order is vital if we're to lead and collaborate credibly with others, that's regionally, nationally, and internationally. So at Hull, we are working to achieving a net zero campus, so scope 1 and 2 emissions, to Iain's point, during our centenary year of 2027. A plan that is as much about our people and partnerships as it is about our estate. All of this is important, but of course our students will be the ones who lead us out of the emergency that we have created. We know that the majority desire further action on climate change and are passionate about this agenda. Our academic programs must deliver against the net zero skills needs. However, whatever their subject specialism, we have a responsibility to equip our students with the attitude, knowledge, and skills they will need to live in an uncertain world, to thrive in jobs that don't yet exist, and to solve the climate crisis in ways that we still have to imagine. Maybe this is actually our biggest civic responsibility, helping our students develop into the skilled, resilient, responsible, and compassionate citizens who will assure the very future of our planet. So in conclusion, this agenda can seem daunting and overwhelming, but the prize is big, and I would argue that universities are in the business of hope. We'll need to continue to be humble, to learn, to innovate through dialogue, meaningful engagement, and genuine partnership. But also we must reflect honestly on barriers and challenges, including political tribalism and short-termism, and work out how we transcend those things together. Ultimately, this is about action, urgent action fueling social change, which requires us to hold ourselves and one another to account for delivery against our civic missions and our place-based impact. Thank you.
Susan, thank you for that. It was an incredible list of initiatives and ideas and things that you're doing at Hull. And it sounds like a really broad-ranging set of activities, whether it's engaging with SMEs or school children or the campus. So huge thanks for sharing that with us. You spoke just briefly at the end there about some of the sort of challenges, and I guess, you know, you talked about ambition and hope and being humble, and I thought that language was really quite powerful in terms of our responsibility as institutions. But as you say, given the sort of where the sector's at and the sort of delicate political environment that we're operating in, and also financial environment, how are you sort of hoping to overcome some of these sort of challenges in actually delivering your climate ambitions? And what do you sort of see as the biggest challenge that might stand in your way?
I think if we take the university in isolation, the challenges are obviously, as many people put on that wordle, you know, it's expensive, it's resource intensive, etc., which is why I think the strategy is critical. So our strategy 2030 was written in consultation with students and staff. It kind of speaks to the DNA of our university, which is a long history in social justice and environmental sustainability. So it's who people think we are at the University of Hull. It's not some new direction. And of course, as we've already said on this call, Iain mentioned this in particular, it's always a journey. So one of the things we're doing is trying to continue to engage fully with staff and students around this agenda, to be bottom up and top down in our approach, so that it's connected, it's about dialogue, it's about how staff see what they do fits into our strategy and the realization of those wider objectives. and so understand the imperative, because actually this is what they want. So this is their strategy, it's not mine. It came from that bottom-up community action. It speaks to who we are as a university, but more importantly, it speaks to the Humber region, which, as I've said, is a region where these things are writ large, and our university must lead, must step into that space to work with others to make that difference for the reasons that I outlined in what I said. More widely, there are other challenges like political tribalism, etc., that we could also talk about, the complexities of devolution, etc. But as a university, that's the issue I would raise.
That's great. Thanks, Susan. Thanks very much for that. I think what we might do is just move on to our final speaker now, and then draw on questions and answers across three panelists. And already had two really inspiring speakers so far. So no pressure, Nick. But so the next speaker now is Nick Gant, who's the founder of Community 21, a social and sustainable design research group, coming to us from the University of Brighton. So thanks, Nick. Over to you.
Hello, thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me to participate today and join esteemed colleagues in much higher authorities than myself as a lowly lecturer. But I come to you from the University of Brighton, and again, I wouldn't suggest that I'll be representing the whole university. But I came to the University of Brighton in 1991 as it transitioned into a university from a polytechnic as a lowly art student, and wanting to join in with my colleagues and students into Brighton as a city that seemed to have a really interesting approach and diversity and kind of inclusive kind of culture. And the university itself lays claim to award-winning organisations such as the Community and University Partnership Programme, that has an international reputation for partnerships across, locally, regionally and internationally as well as our Green Growth Platform that's been running for a number of years now, 10 years or more now, uniting local businesses with green agendas within the institution. But me, myself, just very briefly, I'm very lucky to have worked for over 20 years in the sustainable design agenda, working with large organisations, everything from petrochemical companies to large international manufacturers. But I would consider myself to be a community activist as well. At a local level, I've been a parish councillor and have a role locally in my community. And just very briefly to touch on this word that Iain introduced, actually, which for me is very key and has a subject field specificity, but I think is really important for all of us. And design as a discipline, I think, has changed in many respects and maybe hit a hiatus when a designer, a bloke from Essex like myself, Johnny Ive, could come and lead perhaps one of the world's most powerful companies, Apple, designing products that transform that organization. In many respects, design has made it. It's reached this kind of hiatus of ubiquitous products, but equally a kind of homogeny that hides a lot of the cost of the implications of our consumption of products. Equally, design is perhaps also challenged as being both the problem as well as being potentially the cure, which in and of itself might be a problem for us designers. But I think it's really key to think about our role as designers, as so much of the implications of the matter we consume in the world that contributes to climate change is decided at the design stage. So I run a small design research group here with big ambitions that's been running for over 10 years called Community 21. And it's branded, if you like, as a way to immediately try and approach and broach the barriers between, if you like, the ivory towers and the rest of the world by creating a kind of design agency that's very much engaged in research-led practice. And we're interested in communities in the 21st century and all of what that might entail in terms of technology, climate change and challenges. So in many respects, what we do is, and I suppose my talk today is really about thinking about this notion of enabling and collaboration. And for us, the sale of the community is really, really critical to this. As individuals in the world, I don't know how many of you have met a polar bear, the notion of your impact when buying a toilet roll on desertification in Africa or species extinction in Papua New Guinea is pretty difficult to kind of locate and connect. I think Many of us and our students often are, are asking us where our impact is and what can we do. We see it like this as being the community level, and perhaps the university in and of itself is a community. Community seems like a really important scale and cell at which people can work and have meaning and potency and power. Most of us could probably, if we were asked to think about it, could probably paint a picture in our minds about what our community is, and that might be online, it might be digitally, it might be geographic, but it probably has fringes and edges. And we argue that within that space, all of us have the potential to have power and have agency in making change in our neighbourhoods. But beyond that notion of community, for many of us, perhaps not Iain and Suzanne, who work at a level beyond the community perhaps, but for many of us, beyond that, actually that power and that agency drops away. And this is a kind of critical conversation for our students in rethinking what the role of designers is. In this day and age, gone are the days, we argue, where the designer's name will be a kind of single-authored, gifted individual whose name brands the carrier bags and the name above the door of the studio. And really trying to understand, well, in these great big penetrable kind of issues, where does one have agency? And we kind of break it down and scope it like this, that, as I say, yourself and within your friends and families, you have the potential to make those kind of profound changes and influence change there. Also too within your community. And really a lot of what we do with Community 21 is also then thinking about how we increase that trajectory, that power, that potency through the intranet of ideas, if you like, the archipelago of ideas, by connecting communities together, which of course technology can do, but universities can do in and of themselves by linking up and creating that power. And equally, for many of us at university level through our research, we can also work at operator level. But for most people, that isn't necessarily the case. Large organizations, large businesses are not when most people have their agency and power. So this is an example. I'm going to show some examples really of where we try to enact this kind of change at this level. It's what Ezio Manzini and other scholars refer to the kind of multi-local society. So again, connecting individual communities where there are needs and values with other communities that have that likewise missions perhaps. So we've done a lot of work in collaboration, and that's a key thing, working with local partners, advocacy agencies, local authorities, charities and NGOs on the local level. We really understand what the problems are, and the great advantage for us thinking about the design briefs that we need to attend to, is that communities help us to define the research questions and set the policies and ideas at local level that are very authentic to them. This in fact is a piece of software that we developed back in 2009 that was in support of what became the kind of localism agenda through the Alliance government, but was an opportunity for us to build a piece of software that supported neighbourhoods and communities developing their own neighbourhood plans and community-led plans towards sustainability together. So mapping all sorts of local level, locally authenticated data and positioning that in a piece of software that would allow them to share that data locally. So developing new initiatives, mapping new initiatives, new opportunities to deal with climate change and resilience by identifying new water sources, sharing knowledge across networks to do with a whole range of different things, collecting really locally authentic data about wildlife occurrences and building momentum around there. And this has really allowed us to really connect with communities. These are about 50 communities locally and regionally to us have used this software to do their full development plans at a parish level or a town level. And this is a great way, obviously, for local authorities to engage with that locally authenticated information, that knowledge on the ground. And for example, here, the red dots here are where communities have got initiatives around their emergency planning. And recently, a local authority emergency planner was able to identify that despite being on very low sea level here in Pevensey, this community hadn't undertaken an emergency plan. So we're building up an authentic picture by offering a service through our capacity to build an internet system like this and allow these communities to interact and learn from one another. And a lot of exchanges have happened. We've been able to penetrate, if you like, some of the areas that national government initiatives such as the Green Deal and others haven't been able to, by building up that trust at a local level by offering services and helping advocacy agencies to do their work. This is another example of that inclusion policy around localism, Government initiatives and planning policy are meant to empower all of us to be able to undertake neighbourhood plans and community-led plans and work together towards sustainable development. But lots of the literature and empirical evidence suggests that we don't have those tools. So we've developed things based on the evidence and co-designing initiatives such as this urban room that was designed, the placemaker space that allowed disenfranchised members of the community to come together and create visions, using making as a way to advocate engagement with diverse members of the population to create and build visions for the future of their neighbourhoods that could then be actively shared with developers and stakeholders in the community. And our software has actually now been used by many organisations, other universities and lots of NGOs and charities, and allows us to map and provide local level data. This is actually a student project mapping the green initiatives that the universities connect to in our own city, and allows people to search bike initiatives or where to access foraging for local produce and so on. And it allows us to connect our students directly through live projects year on year with community initiatives. So back in 2010 here, working with the Marine Conservation Society, turning marine waste into flip-flop souvenirs that we could share as a kind of souvenir of this endeavour, but quite some time ago now. And then this right back in 2005, working with a local charity and the local authority to turn an old bus depot into a recycling centre, which won a major award, and work with ex-offenders to take goods and products and services such as e-waste and bring them back into use in the community setting. And things like this, initiatives again defined by the local authorities and care service providers. So a garden for a care home made entirely out of materials, almost entirely out of materials from the site. So recycling old rubble and bricks and things like that, but actually taking the service users of the respite care home into a process of making together, using everything from plastic bags to duvet feathers to make bird boxes, to bring the whole kind of project to life, taking clay from the ground, turning it into pots and so on. So really demonstrating the value of design and creative thinking at a local level to advocate change and allow an inclusion around these really critical discussions and decisions that are being made, often not at a government level, and advocating for them happening at a local level in a way that people can really contribute to in a meaningful way, but sharing that across the network and allowing this knowledge to be shared from the university. So we emanate out of this, the Waste House, which is the first building of its type in Europe to be made entirely from waste from the neighbourhood. And this is now 7-8 years old now and has an international reputation, but more importantly, it has a local reputation for bringing young people in, even to help the build of the whole project, led by a colleague of mine, Duncan Baker-Brown, and an NGO leader, Kat Fletcher, to build a house entirely made from waste of other things and things that other people throw away, as a means to really show a demonstrator on our campus of what it's like to create what could be a social housing project entirely from waste. And then expanding out with that idea of the multi-local society, then we've done lots of work across borders in different countries. This is an example of a project that we've been running since 2014 with an NGO in South Africa, working with communities, this one in particular that had a landfill site, rubbish being burnt in its neighbourhood in the township community. And we worked remotely, just using Skype back then, which was seen as unorthodox and to some degree quite contentious. And our students and teams of individuals on the ground came together to look at the materials that were available to them and how we could learn new ways together about how to use that material to create new opportunities. And that's grown into an initiative that's helped to almost embarrass the local authority there to change their procedures around recycling and waste management, but also to allow the Dreamcatcher Foundation to build an off-grid makerspace to continue this work. Developing products from everyday plastics as well as idiosyncratic non-indigenous species in the neighbourhood. And this is El Medine, who hopefully is going to be teaching some of our students next year how to use these techniques of how to turn plastics, everyday plastics, into souvenirs and new products. And these have now led to a whole range of products being produced that support the neighbourhood with new initiatives, and a whole range of around 40 new entrepreneurial schemes and enterprises have been developed in the community, allowing people to grow. Lots of opportunities around that, take the kind of net zero plus inertia around new opportunities for education, developing community, social cohesion, as well as improving health and life expectations in that community. So growing that out, we've been able to work with different organisations. I'm doing projects now in Indonesia and other countries too, and we're very lucky to be involved in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and British Council's Making Matters programme that again takes this kind of intranet approach to sharing community ideas across boundaries and working in this case with 10 sustainable design leaders from 10 African countries, sub-Saharan African countries. So that gives a kind of overview of the kind of way that we approach this kind of scalar problem really of sustainability by breaking it down into kind of community chunks in a way that both our students and staff can really activate change in a way that's kind of meaningful and has agency in the world. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Nick. I said in the introductory remarks that we'd had 2 inspiring speakers, and so, you know, there was a bit of pressure on you, and you have certainly delivered yet another inspiring speech this afternoon. Fantastic examples of research and community engagement having a genuine impact in climate. So huge thanks to you, Nick, for sharing all those. And I was a bit amused by the placemaker space and the connections to Wordle in terms of design features, yeah. But I'm sure you guys thought of it first. I think Iain's going to sort of open the floor to sort of broad questions across the 3 of you, but, you know, perhaps it would just be interesting to hear you talk to Nick about lots of community sort of focused initiatives, and could you perhaps reflect on how your practices are shifting the institutional approach within a university? Are there ways in which some of your lessons and techniques are actually helping? You know, you spoke about big agencies, people not necessarily feeling agency with them, but are there things from your experiences that could perhaps bring the civic back into the institution in terms of the climate approach?
Is that for me?
Well, I think I'm directing it to you, and then I'll open it over to Iain to okay. Do the broad panel.
Well, I mean, again, as I say, I mean, I've been inspired by the work of the university really in terms of this community university partnership program that has been running for over 2 decades now, and was really started by a previous vice chancellor here. And it was very much about the authenticity that can be generated by working directly in partnership, you know, rather than dealing with the white blank sheet of paper idea approach to how you're going to deal with these kind of scalar issues of sustainability. It's to go out and bring people into the institution really to help us write the briefs, write the opportunities. And again, you know, I'm working with 2 charities right this week about redefining what the role of designer is in those charities. So in effect, working on the specific job description that's required by charities who are working at the community level, making significant change. So one of them is installing nature-based solutions into many NHS hospitals around London. But what they need is a very specific designer who can work directly with communities, understand the social practice as well as the material practice. So for us, I think it's very much that notion of bringing combining that intelligence. You know, we have a collective intelligence within the institution, but it's how we connect that to the outer world to make that impact real and live. And then again, you know, right back to it being meaningful for our students now. So we will have opportunities for our students this summer to go and work in that organisation, but with a very specific job description that's highly current, and you won't find really in any kind of design curriculum specifically laid out in the way that it's defined through that interaction, if that makes sense.
That's great, Nick. Thank you. As I think Iain said, everything needs redesigning, re-engineering. So a really interesting space. I'm just going to kick off with a couple more polling questions just to gather a little bit more group insight. So Claire's kindly put the link. So if you could go on to Slido, just a couple of quick questions and then more questions. So please keep the questions coming into the chat, or unmute yourself and jump in, and then 2 at the very end. So the next question is, name a key benefit of your institution achieving stronger civic climate progress. So give us one key benefit of your institution achieving stronger civic climate progress. So you've had lots of insights there from 3 really interesting, diverse speakers. Thank you for that. So give a key benefit that you think is coming out of this or you expect to achieve. Empowerment, sharing best practice, currency of curriculum, absolutely. I really want to pick up with Susan on preparing people for jobs that don't exist. I think that's really liberating, as is setting targets, not being clear how to achieve them. So sharing best practice, developing joint solutions, bigger impact, wider positive impact. Yeah, so absolutely. Any more? Keep them coming. Delivering change locally, really strong. Thanks, Claire, for doing the word cloud now as well. Reputation, absolutely. I'm going to put the word risk. You know, the number of our institutions' risk registers that don't include climate is quite shocking and a risk. If you look at the claims from the sector with the changing weather patterns, you'd be amazed how many laboratories or servers or actually in basements getting flooded more regularly. So I would say risk should be here as well. Better organizational resilience. That's meeting community needs, joint solutions, delivering change locally. Brilliant stuff. Reputation keeps on coming at us. And then the last one for now, thanks Claire, is what one thing do you recommend every institution does to connect civic and climate action? So it can be really as the fruits of that connected civic and climate action, or it can be, you know, how do you actually connect it? Because I'm aware we've got two communities in this meeting, you know, and we're working very, you know, it's very siloed, departmentalized organizations. How do we connect across the spaces? It's all part of that redesign, isn't it, that all of our speakers have spoken of? What one thing do you recommend every institution does to connect civic and climate action? Talk, absolutely. It's a simple thing, but actually often doesn't happen. Network, partnership networking. Yeah, use the local authority, absolutely. They can be connectors across within the institution as well. Better internal comms, absolutely. I'll just say getting to know each other, and I think this event is part of that as well. Communicating, listening, adaptation strategies. So often we focus only on mitigation, don't we, and not on adaptation. Sadly, some of the changes of climate change are locked in, and we have to adapt as well as mitigate. Absolutely, that's a great unifier to think, how do we handle these risks? How do we redesign? Great, keep those. Give without selfishness. Yeah, absolutely. Carbon literacy training. If you haven't done it, get it. Get you and your colleagues into that space. Climate and sustainability and civic aren't just one person's job, are they? We need a team approach. We need all sorts of minds and backgrounds, diversity of heads coming into this space. Great. Okay, good. So while that happens, do please think of other questions you want to raise. And I'm going to lead with a really interesting one, which I think touches on what most of our speakers have said. It's are we future focused sufficiently? And I'm particularly interested in, you know, what's our core thing? You know, our core thing isn't, you know, our emissions from our institution, is it? It's not. It's the lives of our learners as they leave us, as citizens, as employees. But, you know, Susan, does a university, which is often very poorly compared to an oil tanker, which is very slow to turn. It's a terrible analogy, or maybe it's an accurate one. I'll leave us to discuss that one. How do we reorientate the learning, the teaching, to prepare our learners for a different world, a volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, complex world, but also for a world with jobs that they may be trained for today, but won't exist soon? Susan, what are your thoughts? And then I'll come to Iain.
I mean, that is the tough question, isn't it? As you say. So I suppose my thoughts are as follows. We have no option but to do this. Climate change is here, climate change is now. This is what our students expect. We have a responsibility and the duty to equip them for the future. So we need to make this work, but we do that with them in collaboration through dialogue. So I think the co-design, partnering with your students genuinely and authentically is an important part. I think they have a lot to offer in this space. They know things and understand things that frankly we don't. So I think that's part of it. And for us, looking at how you embed climate change education, if you want to use that term, so there, as you know, there's students on sustainability, there's that initiative, into your curricula is a journey that we're on at the moment, working with our students. And I think some of the characteristics we've been discussing with them are, what are those transferable skills that, as you say, will enable them to be flexible, adaptable, resilient, purposeful, in terms of managing what will be an uncertain and challenging world. So it is about problem solving, it is about confidence, it is about learning how to analyze, how to think through things, how to manage lots of competing different pieces of information. So there's a range of skills that we're discussing with our students that are part of, you know, what we do with many students anyway, and have done historically as educational institutions, but coming from a perspective of saying climate change is here and it's challenging, and we need to try and work together to equip you with the things that you need, but equally listening to them. You know, they've got some great ideas about the sorts of things they feel they need, and ways that we could engage with them better in that space. So for me, it's about dialogue, but yeah, I think it's a work in progress for all of us. So it's that sharing, isn't it? That talking, that collaborating that just came up on that screen.
It's very inspiring, Susan, to hear your ambition and your recognition. It's a hard thing in HE as well. We're quite bogged in down to our sort of curricula controls. Iain, I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts on that. You know, you talk at length about the university and the campus and sequestration, and it's not just about carbon. But what does this mean for the curriculum?
Well, actually, I can't add an awful lot to what Susan said. Actually, I would agree with everything she said there. I think that the curriculum is going to have to change in a number of different ways. One is just the content. I think that there are some subjects where sustainability is not really going to be an issue. Some of the kind of, let's say, technical mathematics and things like that, you just need to learn that stuff. But there's an immense amount that's in the curriculum, particularly in the humanities and the arts, which actually has an axis of sustainability sitting within it. And I think that many of the academic staff are very keen to build that in to the teaching that they do. We already have, as I said, a School of Sustainable Development, so we've got whole degrees on the issue. But the question is, how do you make sure it's actually systemic right across the whole curriculum? There is a bit of top-down management here, but actually most of it is bottom-up, to be quite frank. Most of it is about the students, and we don't really need to work very hard because the students are coming in and saying this is what we want. And when the students are saying that's what they want, then the academics tend to deliver it. And as Susan says, the students have some great ideas. I'm just amazed by the approach taken by some of the students. I feel as if they're ahead of the academics who are teaching them a lot of the time, and that's a good thing for the future. It's a good thing for the community. If there are people who are dragging their feet in this issue, it's us old ones. It's not the young ones. The young ones see the writing on the wall. They know there's going to have to be change. They know they're going to have to be resilient to this. And they build it into their own educational structures. At our university, students kind of design their own curriculums in a way, and as a result, there's a lot of feedback comes in about how to do it, and we are very responsive. So it's going to change just simply because the student attitudes change.
That's really heartening, and that's really encouraging. If anyone, I know there's a lot of experience in the room, so if anyone has any other thoughts on that, on engaging or empowering that student space or that student staff space, please do chip it in. Nick, so we've just been talking here about that new empowered dance between students and staff. between the disciplines as well. What is your experience? You talked about agency as an individual, communities to communities. What's your insight to, or what's your advice on how institutions with their complexity and their silos can facilitate that collaboration across departments, across staff, student, and actually between the institution and the community around it? What's your insight to that with your mapping work?
How to create interdisciplinarity and inter-community connections. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a real challenge. I mean, colleagues have mentioned about siloing and you know, our own infrastructures often or not can stand in the way of some of that. But again, I think it comes back to this notion of the you know, what a university is for, and particularly what a university is for within its place, you know, within its geography. And for me, again, it's, you know, it goes back to some of that resetting the scale. I know it sounds like a broken record there, but you know, the scale of ambition for students, I think for some of us, we're often trying to retune this idea that if they go out into the neighborhood and they meet other students, and often what we'll do projects across ecology, the arts, design, science as well. But if you go out into the community, the answers are there in really in guiding that the principles of what one needs to do. And again, I think thinking about the employment, like I say, down the line, a lot of what we're really trying to demonstrate is that resilience, that flexibility, you know, the kind of buzzwords around agile learning and agile and resilience and so on, I think really comes from personal experience of really engaging with the kind of intelligence that communities want and need at a local level. And I think the only way to do that is to advocate those interactions between the students and the real world, which is something we try to do with almost every project. And that brings an ethical dimension to it, which again, you know, ethics and design is not something that historically in the arts have necessarily gone together in a way of the, you know, the teaching. We always teach an ethical program to our students so that they are in a position to make good decisions about how to interact with people in the outside world and not exploit that opportunity for their own benefit in a way that's inappropriate or extracting. And that's all part of the skill set of trying to build students' social capacity, really. I mean, I think for us, the sustainability agenda is a behaviour one. It's a social issue. So really, you know, we can deal with the nuts and bolts of, you know, circular economies. A lot of the technologies we have are already there. It's about change, really, in terms of the societal and cultural aspect, which again, our students are very capable of provoking and changing. But it's not just about thinking about inroads into big organisations. It can be very much thinking about, well, what is your town? What is your neighbourhood? And what is your impact there? And for many young people, actually, I think they want that meaningful exchange. They're not necessarily all set out to become the next Vivienne Westwood or so on. It's about making that kind of change at a level where, you know, there's meaning, there is that agency there.
Super, thank you. I've only got a couple of minutes left, and I've got a couple of polls in there, but I just wanted to pick up Susan and maybe give everyone just a quick sort of one or two line answer. Susan, you talked about universities, Hull, having a central role to play in achieving a just transition. I was really interested to hear you use that word, just transition. So it's not just talking about climate action, it was that just, and it suggests there might be an equity, inclusiveness sort of dimension. Do you want to just touch on that? Because that's probably at the heart of this event, isn't it? The civic agenda and the climate agenda, and people coming at it from an environmental or a social dimension, but this is actually bringing them together. Talk to us about your perception of Hull at the heart of a just transition.
So very briefly, given the time, as I said, you know, this is an area that was one of the highest carbon emitters, but it's also one of the areas of starkest inequality. So, you know, when we talk about how do we level up, to use government language, and touch net zero, we have to connect these two things together. They go hand in hand, because if we can drive through genuinely inclusive growth, and rhetoric is easy in this space, and I will just park that. It's really easy to say, really difficult to do. But this is the opportunity, isn't it, through climate change, to think about how does one bring about climate justice, if you like? How do you bring a just, wise society that is net zero through all of the things that are going to happen? You know, jobs, skills, new technologies, innovations. It's all of those things together. So for me, you can't think about bringing about climate change without bringing about a just transition. You've got to connect those two things. Otherwise, you've got two things running in parallel, and they may not intersect. So for me, they're absolutely interrelated, and our role is to continue to knit them together in a way that is strategic and delivers change.
Thanks. Iain, a quick one-liner on that one, sorry, and then Nick. You're on mute, Iain.
Right. Yes. Well, I mean, I think I'm not sure I can add an awful lot to Susan's points. I think that strategically, we are there as institutions sitting within national systems, and it's our duty as institutions to do absolutely the best we can. But also because we're university structures, and we are supposed to be the custodians of knowledge and actually, frankly, future capability. I think we have a duty to lead on this, which is actually unique within society. And as a result of that, I think if universities don't actually show the way to do this, then frankly nobody is, to be quite frank. And coming to a point that Nick raised about ethics, I think that ethics comes up a lot in our conversations, and it's a major driver behind what we're doing. And even though what we're doing is enormously difficult and challenging for the university as a business, ethically we think we have no choice.
That's super, Iain. And Nick, I'm going to take that as your last word. Sorry, I'm out of time. But just to bring it quickly onto the last poll. So, penultimate, sorry. What one thing has this event inspired you to do? What one thing has this event inspired you to do? So if you just put a word into the word cloud there. So quick brain dump. What is this one thing you're going to do? Is it get to know your colleague in Civic, or is it whatever it is? So if you could just add one thing that this event has inspired you to do. We'll just do this for 30 seconds. So let's do that. And then the next question, just to give you a heads up, is what next steps do you want the Civic University Network and EAUC to do next to take on this agenda? What's next? Where should we head next? What should we do next? So talk to our partner university about how we can work together. Absolutely brilliant. Engage with other institutions. Yeah, this is not a competitive space. This is for us all. Until all universities and colleges lead on this, we're going to struggle. Open dialogue, connect more, absolutely. Network. Map our civic connections, super. What Iain has just said there, that we have a unique space, a unique opportunity to lead on this. So, we have deep roots, we are anchors, we have a longer perspective than most. That's a really powerful thing to do. Okay, so if you don't get a chance to add any further comments on what's this inspired you to do, and then the final one, Claire, is what next step? What do you want to see next happening here? When the leaders of the network and the EAUC are meeting in a month, where should we be going next? What would be useful to you to help you take those things that you're going to do next to the next level? What can we do? One or two words, whatever you need, just put them into this space. And then Natalie, as this happens, I'm now handing over to you to close. So thank you all. I'm not sure if that link is there yet.
Brilliant. Thank you, Iain. It's sped through this hour and a half, but a huge thanks to all our speakers, to Iain and Susan and Nick for some really insightful speeches and connections to the way that civic and climate is working across three quite different institutions and places. So huge thanks for that. We're really interested to see what happens in next steps. We've got some ideas. There's a quick plug for a couple of upcoming events. There's the EAUC conference in Loughborough in November that'll be picking up on this. There's also the Civic University Network program of events that'll be happening in June. And and also there's, you know, we will be sort of sharing resources in the sort of Civic University Network members area, but also amongst you all as participants in this, to sort of pick up some of the slides and the tools that we've done today. So thank you all very, very much for coming and for joining in with the polling. And we are really keen, as we said at the beginning, to continue to connect these agendas and to work together to sort of see how we might be able to help institutions as they are trying to pull together the very ambitious requirements for action around climate, along with things like, you know, civic university agreements and other things that are also happening simultaneously in terms of an increasing emphasis on the potential of civic within universities to embed universities and reflect their commitment to their place and their people, and also through their climate objectives. So do keep in touch with both our institutions. Do reach out if you've got burning ideas after this. But it comes to that point of the day where I say thank you hugely to everybody for joining. We've absolutely loved having you all here, and we look forward to hopefully picking up this conversation again soon. So thanks very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day.